WrestleRant here today, folks, with my review of WrestleMania 23 as seen on the WWE Network. We are on the fast track to WrestleMania 31, and if you haven't already, go back and check out my past WrestleRant videos for my reviews of WrestleManias 1 through 22, already up here on the channel. Some from last year, 17, 19, 20, 21, were on the channel from last year. All the rest are already up here in the last few months if you want to go back and check those out before listening to this review. But WrestleMania 23 was one of the final WrestleManias, believe it or not, that I had not seen in its entirety. I had watched, of course, 1 through 22 over the last couple of months after having watching those in full. 23 was one of the final ones that I did not watch in its entirety. Finally did so only a couple days ago, and I really enjoyed the show a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I mean, looking back on the results, I always thought it was a decent show, based off the main events. Maybe it was just because I'm biased and I grew up in '08 and I've been a fan since then. But still, I look back on 23 and it wasn't as good, in my opinion, as some of the WrestleManias from 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, as well as even 24, which I thought was a better WrestleMania. And I'll get to that in my 24 review. Maybe it's just personal bias, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm still watching it back, though. I thought 23 was a really good show, and I'll get to exactly why just now. Kicking off the show, the Money in the Bank ladder match with the winner earning a future shot at either the WWE ECW. I mean, let's come on. Let's be serious here. Who is going to cash that in for the ECW Championship? Or the World Heavyweight Championship at any time and any place of their choosing. The combatants included Mr. Kennedy, CM Punk, Matt Hardy, Randy Orton, Jeff Hardy Edge, King Booker, and Finlay. The first ever, I believe, 8-man Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania. I think the one at number 22, I think at WrestleMania 22 the year prior featured 6 competitors. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that had 6, and this was the first one that had 8. Shirley went down to 7 in only a matter of minutes when Jeff Hardy took a sick bump from the top of the ladder in the ring, splashing on top of Edge, who was sprawled out on top of another ladder outside of the ring, just breaking Edge in half, as well as the ladder, as well as himself. Jeff Hardy continued on, but not for much longer. Edge was taken out of there immediately. But the match itself, though, it was a really, really good, your typical Money in the Bank ladder match. I mean, there's some Money in the Bank ladder matches in the last 10 years that I was not very fond of. I thought this was one of the better ones, of course. I love the one at 24, but I thought this one was great as well. Everyone had a lot of good showings here. Randy Orton especially hitting that RKO out of nowhere out of like 3 or 4 different guys during the contest. That was pretty cool. But a lot of people in the matchup had a viable shot of walking out victorious. CM Punk was just kind of random, just kind of representing ECW. But Finlay came close to reaching that mountaintop on a number of occasions in years prior. King Booker, the former World Heavyweight Champion, Matt Hardy was a solid mid-card guy over on SmackDown at that time. Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, both. Jeff Hardy came very close to winning that World Heavyweight Championship on several occasions in 2007. The involvement of Orton and Edge, however, was really confusing to me personally. In seeing that, I'm going to write an article about this, and it might be already up by the time you listen to this on ProWrestlingShirts.com. Why Edge versus Randy Orton was one of the greatest feuds in the last 10 years that was never really came to fruition. I know we saw it for a little bit for a cup of coffee in 07, shortly after this matchup, and even in 2010 for a little bit before Randy Orton got injured, and that went nowhere pretty much. I don't want to get a huge rant about this right now, but to me it feels like Edge and Orton should have had a one-on-one match on this show. There was really no point. I mean, like I said, they both had good showings. Edge took that nasty bump from Jeff Hardy, and Randy Orton had a really good showing here, even though he didn't win. Still, though, I thought both guys were really good in the matchup, but why not just have them go one-on-one? It would have been a solid, addition to the card. It would have beat the fuck out of Khali versus Kane. And I know what they were going for there, but Orton and Edge would have had a much better match at WrestleMania. Because if you go back a little bit, the two were teaming for a couple months as Rated RKO, having that great feud at DX, where the World Tag Team Champs dropped the straps to Michaels and Cena I think in January, right after the Rumble, I believe. Or maybe right after Michaels became number 1 contender. I can't remember exactly. But it was around that time that they dropped the straps and started teasing tension between one another, leading to the two entering the Money in the Bank ladder match. And I feel like it should have just been a one-on-one match on that show, because it's not like we didn't get it on this show, but we got it at Backlash. They were both involved in the Fatal 4-Way for the WWE Championship at Backlash the month later, also involving Cena and Michaels, of course. And I believe they might have had a one-off match on Raw during that time, too. but the feud never really came to fruition due to Edge going over to SmackDown after winning the Money in the Bank contract from Kennedy, who I'll get to in just a second, and going on to become World Heavyweight Champion on the SmackDown brand where he made his home until he retired in 2011. So that was pretty disappointing to me, but still, though, they had really good showings in this match, as noted before. Kennedy, I thought, was like the picture-perfect winner for this matchup. He was being pushed hard on Friday nights from late 2005 when he debuted to 2007, touting that he had beaten 10 former World Heavyweight Champions or something like that, some crazy number over on SmackDown, Rey Mysterio, Batista, Undertaker, all these people, all these top-tier talents, and he was the perfect guy to win this matchup. He had the mic skills. He was not the greatest in-ring wrestler, but he was very entertaining. He was a great character. He was over. He knew his role as a heel, and he played that role to perfection. And the only thing that I believe, it wasn't like they botched the decision, like, oh, it should have been this guy instead. Kennedy was the best winner for that matchup. The only thing that went wrong with it was that Undertaker, who had to get surgery or something like that, had to drop the World Heavyweight Championship to the spring, but they didn't want to drop it back down to Batista. They wanted to put it on a heel, so Batista would be put in chase mode for the World Heavyweight Championship. And originally, Kennedy was going to cash in that briefcase on Undertaker on that SmackDown. That was supposed to be Kennedy instead of Edge. But I guess they found out there was something, quote-unquote, wrong with Kennedy health-wise, and they freaked, and they put the briefcase on Edge instead. I guess Kennedy got injured, but he wasn't actually injured. They jumped to conclusions, and Edge, ironically, ended up getting injured during his reign as World Heavyweight Champion. So it was just a sign that, there was the timing and the injuries, everything with Kennedy just did not work out in WWE, unfortunately. It was not what he should have been in that company. But still, a great match to kick off the show. I really enjoyed that. Speaking of things I did not enjoy, however, Khali versus Kane. Like I said, they wanted to do a Battle of the Titans thing, and Khali around this time was still kind of, he was still unpinned, he had never submitted in the WWE. That would come in a couple months when he feuded with John Cena. But the match itself was absolutely awful. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that. So if you watch this WrestleMania, just fast forward right through it. Thankfully, it was 5 minutes, but, unfortunately, it was 5 minutes. It could have been 30 seconds for all I care, and it would not have changed my opinion for this of this matchup. Khali went over. That was it. I mean, got another win under his belt. No one gave a shit. That was pretty much it, though. So, just fast forward through that match if you watch this match on the network. Up next, the WWE United States Championship, Chris Benoit defending the gold against newcomer MVP, making his WrestleMania debut on this show. A really good matchup, kind of got buried underneath, the Money in the Bank ladder match and the world title match and the main event and the involvement of Donald Trump and McMahon and everything. Everything else that went down on the show, I thought this match was kind of a hidden gem. I mean, it wasn't a great match, and they would have better matches down the line at Backlash, their 2 out of 3 count falls match. At Judgment Day a couple of months later. But it was still a good match. MVP had a good showing in defeat, kind of keeping him in chase mode. Although it should have been the other way around, considering that MVP was the heel and Benoit was the face, but whatever. But Benoit was one of those impressive United States champions for the time that he held that belt from late 2006 to early 2007. This would also be his final WrestleMania, too, before the whole tragedy that summer. But still, though, a good matchup. Benoit came out victorious and still the United States champion. This was also the final time that the United States Championship was defended at WrestleMania before just this year, where Cena will face Rusev, will challenge for the Star-Spangled Prize against the undefeated Rusev. So it's the first time since 23, so the first time in 8 years, if you can believe that, the United States Championship will be defended at WrestleMania. So up next on WrestleMania 23, Batista defending his World Heavyweight Championship against The Undertaker, who is looking to go 15-0 on this show. So a really, really good matchup. I still say that they're better matches. I mean, I'll talk about this at the end of the video too, but I feel like the better matches between Cena and Michaels, as well as Undertaker and Batista, came later on, but both matches were still really, really good. Especially this one. I thought Undertaker and Batista, Batista said on his DVD that they stole the show. I don't agree with the fact they went on 5th or 4th or whatever. It says 5th here, but that's kind of the dark match. But in reality, they went on 4th in the show, which made no sense. And I understand they wanted to give time to Donald Trump, and they wanted that to be the other semi-main event aside from the WWE title match. And I don't want to say that was when the world title started to not mean anything. I would still go back to WrestleMania 22 when Rey Mysterio's match was cut down to like 9 minutes when he won the world championship, and that wasn't even the main event. So that was kind of the start of it, in my opinion. And Undertaker, who was a respected veteran, that year's Royal Rumble winner. Now, I'm not saying it should have been in the main event, and I understand why they didn't do it, but it should have been at least second to last, third to last, not fucking 4th in the card. It could have been worse. It could have been first, like we saw at WrestleMania 27 and 28 respectively. But that bothered me a little bit. But Batista mentioned on his documentary that they stole the show. They said, follow that. I still say that Cena Michaels stole the show. I thought that was the best match of the night. But this, like I said before, this was still a really good match with strong performances from both guys. Taken to the outside, Batista was not heavily booed, but the people were in the corner of The Undertaker. I mean, you put anyone up against The Undertaker, more often than not, the person that The Undertaker is facing will get booed, regardless of whether they're face or heel, and Batista was in that category on this show. But he still had a really good showing. He was, made out to be in the 2 years from when he won his first World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 21. He was made out to look like a very credible, top-tier main event guy. So he had a chance of breaking the streak, and he did, and he came out short of victory. He fell short of victory against The Undertaker, who went 15-0 on this show to win his first World Heavyweight Championship in, I think, about not a decade. He won the WWE title in 2002. His first ever World Heavyweight Championship, I'll say that much. In his first world title win at WrestleMania since, I think, 13 when he faced Psycho Sid. So a really good match from Taker and Batista. Up next, an 8-man tag team match pitting the ECW Originals, which consisted of Rob Van Dam, Sabu, the Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer, against the New Breed, which consisted of Kevin Thorne, Marcus Corvon, Elijah Burke, and Matt Striker. So this was kind of like the old school versus the new school on the revamped version of ECW. And by this point, it was already slowly dying a death. I mean, it had not even been on TV for a year yet, and it was already kind of getting towards that point where it started to not mean anything at all. But, it was a fine matchup. I'm not going to say it was bad or a waste of time. They got decent time, about 7 or 8 minutes. The ECW Originals came out victorious. More often than not, in any other scenario, I would put the younger guys over. I really wasn't too frustrated with that because it's not even like they went over in the end, and they probably should have, considering the fact that most of these ECW Originals were gone by the end of the year, as well as most of the New Breed, too. RVD left later that year. Dreamer would stick around for another couple years. Sabu was gone by the end of 2007, as well as Sandman. And for the New Breed, Elijah Burke stuck around for another year or so. Marcus Corvon got released by the end of 2007. Kevin Thorne as well. Matt Striker turned into a commentator the following year. So it's crazy to think in just a year's time what happened to all these guys. All 8 guys involved in this matchup. But fine for what it was. The babyfaces got the big win after being berated on ECW. So from a storytelling standpoint, it was fine. I enjoyed it. Decent matchup between the old school and new school of ECW. Up next, the hair versus hair matchup, pitting Bobby Lashley, who is representing Donald Trump, taking on Umaga, who is representing Mr. McMahon, in the Battle of the Billionaires, as it was billed, with Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special guest referee. So as you can tell from that mouthful of an introduction for this matchup, it was there was a lot of components here. You had Stone Cold, the hair versus hair stipulation, 2 of the biggest quote-unquote billionaires or Battle of the Millionaires, whatever you want to call it, in recent history, and then you have the Intercontinental Champion facing the ECW Champion, just crazy stuff like that, so a lot of components here. The match itself I thought was good, was not like a technical masterpiece. I mean, Umaga was always an impressive specimen in the ring, but that more so had to do with his opponents. I mean, he was always a great talent. I still say that to this day. Rest in peace, Umaga. But, still, I didn't think he had some of his better matches with Lashley. I mean, obviously, more of the focus was on Trump and McMahon at ringside, and Trump clotheslining McMahon at the end of the matchup, which was great. A great visual there, but still a solid matchup. Bobby Lashley, for all the shit that he gets as a talker, and he's not a good talker, I'll say that, but, he was a very impressive, and still is, over in TNA, almost 10 years later. An impressive in-ring specimen along with Umaga. So they put together a solid matchup. Wasn't really disappointed with that. And all the other components, like I mentioned before, Stone Cold and Trump and McMahon and even Shane, who got involved at one point, made it really entertaining. So I'm not going to say it was a great match, but it was very enjoyable and entertaining. And it ended up paying off, too, because I think it was one of the most bought WrestleManias of all time due to this Battle of the Billionaires angle going into the show, of course, with everything else. But Donald Trump was one of the leading reasons why the show did as well as it did in terms of buy rates and stuff like that. But still, very entertaining matchup. Bobby Lashley came out victorious with a spear on Umaga to pick up the victory and hand over the win to Donald Trump, who had to shave the head of Mr. McMahon and shave him bald with the help of Stone Cold and Lashley, and they're all, pitching in. Great visual, really entertaining in the barber chair in the middle of the ring. And they would shave McMahon bald completely, and his hair came off so easily, like a complete 180 from when Molly Holly got shaved bald at WrestleMania. I think it was 20 when that happened, and it took Tara in TNA. But it took Victoria like 20 minutes, not even, maybe even more than that, to shave the head of Molly Holly. I mean, her hair was all wet and whatever, and McMahon's obviously wasn't. But still, it was only within like a minute or two that McMahon was completely shaven bald. But yeah, still, Stone Cold would celebrate with Lashley after the matchup. They would drink some beers as well as Trump, and after the matchup, Stone Cold would hit Trump with one of the worst Stone Cold Stunners I've ever seen in my life, and that was not because of Stone Cold. It was more so because of the way that Trump sold it. But he's a celebrity. What can you expect? So that was really entertaining. Like I said before, I thought it was a solid matchup from Lashley and Umaga, and the angle ended up being paid off in a big, big way at WrestleMania. And of course, it would lead into Lashley having to face off against Umaga and Shane and Vince in handicap match situations in the months that followed. Up next, a women's championship match, a lumberjill matchup for the women's championship. Melina versus Ashley. The match itself was complete throwaway. Obviously, it was just serving as a filler bout before the main event to kind of bring the crowd down. I get that, but why Ashley was inserted into this match instead of Mickie James is beyond me, because I know Melina beat Mickie James for the title on Raw, and they had some Falls Count Anywhere match, which was really good from what I understand. And then where does Ashley come in? And I understand maybe the whole Playboy thing, that's probably why they wanted her on the show, but maybe even a tag team match, like would it have killed her to be put in a tag team match instead of a one-on-one match? Because Ashley is no good in the ring. And I mentioned this while watching, I think it might have been 24, because she was involved in 24 the year prior in a tag team match, coincidentally enough. But on this show, it reminded me while just watching Ashley in the ring that she was like the equivalent, the WWE equivalent to Velvet Sky. I mean, she's very good looking, but absolute shit tier in the ring. She was never any good. So this match I did not enjoy, despite how good Melina tried to make it. She's a great in-ring athlete, and I think still one of the most underrated talents that WWE has ever had in their Divas division. She tried to make the most out of it, but it was a complete train wreck involved with all the lumberjills at ringside, and Ashley just being terrible, so that was a complete waste of time and a complete train wreck of a matchup. But we get to the main event for the WWE Championship. John Cena defending against Shawn Michaels. And I thought this match was spectacular. And like I said with Taker and Batista, I still feel like their best match did not come on this show. It would come a couple weeks later on I don't know what the date it was, but I know it was in late April in England, that hour-long matchup on Monday Night Raw, that main event that took up almost half the show, that fantastic matchup. And this matchup, I mean, it was still very, very good. It was not of that caliber. They only got 30 minutes. I mean, I don't want to say should have gotten more, but that match ended up getting twice that. But still, though, this was still a fantastic match from both guys, and it just went to show. It just goes to show however you say it, how much great chemistry these two had together inside the ring. And John Cena, it was around this time that people blamed him that he couldn't wrestle and all this other shit, which I get. And I think in the years that have followed, I think he's kind of prove those naysayers wrong. And I'm not the biggest John Cena fan whatsoever. I'm with the majority in saying that, he's been still for years now. But I'm not among those that say that he's a terrible wrestler. I think he proved those rumors wrong a long time ago. It's kind of starting with this matchup with Michaels. I mean, he had a really good match with Triple H the year prior, but I thought this was a lot better than this match, or than that match, excuse me. I thought Michaels, I'm not going to say he carried him to a good match, because John Cena more than held his own, but Michaels was definitely a leading factor in why that match was so great. He's called Mr. WrestleMania for a reason, people. That should be no surprise. But a great, great matchup, got a lot of great time, almost 30 minutes, and in the end, John Cena would lock in that STF for almost a minute or two before Michaels finally tapped out to give Cena the victory. Much to the dismay of the live crowd, who was not happy to see John Cena win after he was booed out of the building in Chicago the year prior in his match against Triple H, and much like on this show as well. People were just sick of seeing him. Not as much today, like I think at WrestleMania now. I just can't recall, like at WrestleMania in recent years, him being that booed as he was in 22 and 23. I mean, nothing has really changed with his character. I mean, that's one of his leading issues in the last 10 years. But he was not as booed as heavily in recent years as much as he was on 23 and 22 at WrestleMania. So I don't know what the deal was there, but still a great matchup. Bottom line, really enjoyed it. And I would also, lead to that rematch that I mentioned before, the hour-long matchup between Michaels and Cena on Monday Night Raw in England. I believe that was non-title because Michaels came out on top, and I know he didn't win the championship. And that would lead into, that was actually better than the match that Sunday, the Fatal 4-Way match, like I mentioned before, between Edge, Orton, Michaels, and Cena for that WWE Championship. But great way to go off the show. Really enjoyed that match. On the whole, I thought this was a really good WrestleMania. I wouldn't go so far to call it as an amazing WrestleMania. Like I said, maybe it's because I grew up the following year and I took a liking to 24. But still, I thought 23 was better than I thought it was going to be. I always knew it was a good WrestleMania, but I always thought it was like, meh, not as good as some of the others. But, watching it back in its entirety, I thought this was a really, really good WrestleMania. As all the main event matches delivered for the most part. Taker and Batista should have been higher up on the card, as I mentioned before, but they had a really, really good matchup. The Battle of the Billionaires between Lashley and Umaga, the match itself was not fantastic. It was nowhere near as good as the other two world title matches, but it was solid, and all the other components thrown in, all the other elements of that matchup, Stone Cold, Trump, and Shane, and everyone else, I thought made it very entertaining, so I liked that. And then the main event, like I just said, I thought was spectacular. The undercard didn't blow me away. The only match in the undercard I thought was really, really good was the Money in the Bank ladder match, which was perfectly placed in the opener slot of this show. Everything else I didn't really care for too much. I thought Benoit and MVP had a really good match. Kane and Khali was a complete waste of time, as was the women's title match and the 8-man ECW Originals versus New Breed matchup, that 8-man tag team match. I thought it was fine for what it was. So I would definitely give this show 1, if not 2 thumbs up. I thought it was really enjoyable. Definitely go back and check it out on the WWE Network. And I'll be back tomorrow right here on the YouTube channel with my full review of WrestleMania 24. So in the meantime and in between time, folks, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you guys then.